Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like-minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but 2 of my last 3 trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler, and thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. Amateur Traveler Podcast, Episode 59. Today on the show, we go to China with Rob Walsh from Podcast 411. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. This episode is brought to you by HotelBook.com, the official site of independent hotels worldwide. HotelBook.com. Stay your way. Stay independent. I have 3 news stories for you today. One of a personal note. Welcome to all the people who discovered the Amateur Traveler podcast through its promotion on Podcast Alley as one of the featured podcasts of the week. For the long-time listeners who haven't yet got around to voting for the show on Podcast Alley or commenting on it, there's a lot of people looking, so this might be a good time. Story number 2. Again, New York City is ranked by the FBI as the safest city in America. There's a little controversy about the numbers from the likes of Honolulu and San Jose, who are second and third, pointing out things like, well, if you weight it by the seriousness of crime, then New York, which has twice the murder rate of San Jose, might not be safest by that definition. But still, in any case, good job, New York, from the turnaround from a couple decades ago. And finally, because it's a slow news week, I have an article for you, linked in the show notes and also in the iTunes enhanced version of the show, called Funniest Questions Asked by Tourists. And this comes from the Travel Industry Association of America. Top funniest questions. From a whitewater rafting trip, does the river come back to the same spot where we put in? Does the sun set every night? Are the Amish in season? How long is the one-day pass good for? What time does the 9 o'clock ferry leave? How many miles of undiscovered cave are there? Why is the closed for cleaning sign on the restroom? At Yosemite National Park, when do they turn off the waterfalls? How come all of the war battles were fought in national parks? Why don't you have better marking in the places where the trails do not exist? Is this the same moon we see in Vermont? Does the bus tour go to the same places that the boat tour does? Why don't you have more signs saying to keep the area pristine? From an American tourist in Hawaii, how much does it cost to mail a letter to the United States? Are you expecting any earthquakes? If it rains, will the fireworks be held inside? Will I need my passport when I get off the ferry on Nantucket? At a bed and breakfast, do you serve breakfast? Is the horse manure on the square real? At an aquarium, when your fish die, do you flush them down the toilet like we do at home? When do caribou turn into moose? On a boat passing through the fjords of the Alaska's Inside Passage, what's the altitude? And now, this one isn't really such a silly question if you think about it. What time of year are the fewest Californians here? Unless, of course, that was a question asked in California. But on that note, today on the show, I'm pleased to have an interview with Rob Walsh from the popular Podcast 411, the behind-the-scenes, inside the studio for podcasters. And Rob and I met just briefly at the expo last year, but have exchanged a few emails since then, and had just a wonderful conversation. You're only going to hear part of it, the travel-related part. But I will tell you, this show, I'm going to say, is rated PG-13, just because of a few comments that Rob makes that I just couldn't cut, including Rob's most embarrassing travel moment. And here's Rob. I'd like to welcome to the show Rob from the Podcast 411. Rob, welcome to the show.
Chris, great to be here.
Now, Rob and I had a little trouble trying to figure out what to talk about in terms of, because he's taken a number of trips, but we decided to talk about some of your trips to China, and you've been there a number of times.
I've been there 6 times.
On
5 of the, all business.
All business, okay.
Although there was some mix of pleasure in there, so I got to see all the major, what you would call tourist traps of China.
And what are the major tourist traps of China here?
Well, obviously there is Tiananmen Square and the Forbidden City, which was really interesting because when I got to go to Tiananmen Square and the Forbidden City, the person I was in China with was someone I used to work with at a company called Vectron, and he was actually in the Tiananmen Square uprising. And he was one of the student protesters, and he had slept there for 30 days in Tiananmen Square. And the reason he didn't get arrested was because his parents were both high up in the army.
Oh, wow.
But he told me some stories about what had gone on there, and there was more than a couple people that were killed.
Huh. So you didn't have just a tourist experience at Tiananmen Square.
Oh, and I actually did buy the disposable camera, so I had part of the tourist experience. But yeah, I got some inside that most people wouldn't have gotten, which was nice.
What sort of things did you, as I eventually get to Tiananmen Square, I was hoping to get there this year, but I'm not sure it's going to happen. As I'm standing there and I'm reading, whatever guidebook I've got, what am I going to miss that you heard?
You probably missed the things about how many students that were there, how long they were there in the square, that people were coming up and giving them food, that many people were really in support of them, that the average person in Beijing really was in support of the students, and it was purely the military that broke it up. But
well, as I recall, too,
person.
The first military they sent in, who was from nearby Beijing, did not break it up. Really, they had to bring in military from further afield too.
And there was more people killed than what is the official word. My friend didn't give me an exact number, but he said it was more than whatever. I think they said 10 or 7 at the time.
Oh, okay.
And they may not even say any were killed officially, depending on who you talk to.
Right. Certainly, obviously, nothing gets... that's one of those things that doesn't know those stories get through the Great Firewall of China right now. It's one of those prohibited terms to even talk about.
And there was quite a few people that went to jail. And if you weren't lucky enough to have your parents as a high-up official, you went to jail.
Interesting. Getting back to the top tourist attractions or tourist traps of China, Tiananmen Square, Forbidden City.
Okay. Obviously, the terracotta soldiers.
Oh, you did get to the terracotta soldiers.
Yes. Matter of fact, I have a couple pictures I took of it, so I don't know if you want me to
absolutely.
scan and send those.
Absolutely. Holly.
Okay. Yes, and I went to the Terracotta. So, another one that many people don't know about is Dr. Smith, who was kind of like their Thomas Jefferson of China, who was very pro-democracy in the 1930s.
Hmm.
And he's got a mausoleum there, which if you get a chance to go to, and I believe that was in Nanjing, so that in the outskirts of Nanjing.
Interesting.
Which is a nice one to go to. Also made it to Confucius's, where he studies.
I challenge you to say that again.
Yeah, I made it there and got to bang the gong, so to speak, that you can do and all the little touristy things. They have a reconstruction of Confucius's buildings or a school, temple, whatever you want to call it, because the original one had been burned down, but they had rebuilt it.
And I don't remember what year he's from, but I want to say around 700, 800 AD. It's quite a while ago.
It was, yes, and it was definitely before 1000, and I think it was in that time frame. I can't remember. Yeah, I'm so good. I went there and I don't remember the exact date. I was thinking it was closer to 500 AD, but you might be right. But it was interesting to see. They had the recreation of what they had for studying, and where people would take the tests, and you had to come in and take these tests to get accepted in, and they had the different disciples of Confucius who what they believed in and their philosophy thoughts, and they had statues of them. So it was a nice thing. It was a very hot day when I went. It was like in middle of July. I remember the people with me were like about to pass out.
And in general, what you've been in there in the summer, obviously. Then,
Right.
Any favorite time of the year? I don't know what different seasons you've
It
been.
depends it depends where you go.
Sure.
I've been there all year long in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and Hong Kong and Shenzhen are in the southern part of China.
Right.
And Shenzhen is actually the major area where it's a new city where a lot of construction's going on, and it's across the bay from Hong Kong.
Right.
And what you actually do, usually if you're going to Shenzhen, you actually fly into Hong Kong, and then you take a train over to Shenzhen. And just advice for anyone that takes the train from Kulan Station to Shenzhen, make sure you get the first class ticket. It's like 66 Hong Kong dollars. And Hong Kong dollars are different than China RMB.
Okay.
So if you actually go into Hong Kong and then you're going to be spending the rest of your trip in China, that you're just going to stay one day in Hong Kong, don't convert all your money into Hong Kong dollars, because you're just going to have to convert it again when you get to mainland China.
Okay. Now, the other thing I've heard is flying into Hong Kong in itself is an experience, or is that different with the new airport?
That's different with the new airport.
Okay.
Now you fly in, the airport's it's not in downtown anymore. It's on the outskirts, and you take a train from the airport into downtown. And make sure you take the train. The cab is just ridiculously expensive.
Well, because the story with the old airport is that you felt like you could reach out the window and get a cup of tea from one of these buildings as you were flying past here. You were flying low enough over these high rises.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever watch any of the old Jackie Chan or any of the old even Jean-Claude Van Damme movies that were done in Hong Kong, they usually had this shot of the plane coming right over the top of the building and literally right over the top. and that was a little dangerous, so they finally decided to move the airport out away from downtown Hong Kong.
Favorite... Well, two different questions. Favorite part of Hong Kong, and then favorite of China, and then favorite food was going to be the next one. I don't know if those are the same.
In Hong Kong, I always stayed in Kowloon, which is across the harbor from Hong Kong, so you could actually see Hong Kong at night, and the buildings all light up. And it's right where I would stay is right next to it was the Sheraton. But it was right next to the Peninsula, which is a real famous hotel in Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. Very expensive, like $400 a night. The Sheraton was like $150. I have a Cisco code. If anyone wants the Cisco corporate code, shoot an email to Rob at podcast411.com. And you just put that in the Sheraton website, and you get these lower rates. But if you get a chance, what you want to do is you want to get Yeah, the hotel that I used to always stay in Hong Kong was the Sheraton Hong Kong Hotel and Towers, and that was in Kowloon. And you want to get the harbor view if you can, and at nighttime, if you have a chance to just sit there and be looking out at the harbor and across to the buildings in Hong Kong, they usually have these light shows that go up on the buildings and lasers, and it's really, really impressive. It's just gorgeous. I can remember one time I was there. One of the last times I was there, and I had the harbor view, and I was sitting there listening to PK&J show and watching the laser light show go. It was just really surreal.
Now, you say they usually have, on a normal night, they have a laser and light show?
Yeah, normal nights, yeah. It's like more, yeah, it's just all the lights of the buildings. It's really cool.
Interesting.
Shanghai has a similar thing. They do a similar thing in Shanghai if you get a chance to see.
Oh, I didn't see that when I was in
buildings
Shanghai.
have a light effect. In Shanghai, I don't know which hotel you stayed at, but I stayed at the tallest hotel in the world. It's the tower.
The the Tomorrow Square Marriott.
It
Is it the one that looks like a rocket ship that has pointy?
It's very follicky looking.
Yes,
Just one
that's where I
big
stayed.
spire, and the hotel starts at the 55th floor
Yes.
and goes all the way up to the 88th floor.
Yes,
And
right
and
by the
and
Shanghai
88th
Museum and the Opera House.
Yeah, and that is just incredible. And it's got the world's tallest pool, which is at the 55th floor. And
Oh, I didn't get to the pool. I got to the library which is above the club lounge. There's it kind of. Did you ever get to the top? There's almost like a clubhouse.
yeah, and you can walk all the way around. And,
Yes.
and we were up there at night, one night, and we got to watch the light show.
Okay, I did
It was
not
really
see that.
cool.
So, as you talk about Hong Kong, that sounds like it's got a particularly soft spot in your heart for Hong Kong.
Okay. Well, yeah, what I really liked that hotel, the Sheraton Hong Kong, was you walk out the hotel and right across there was this arboretum and museum, and with a walk on the harbor. And on that walk was actually like their walk of fame. So you see all these different handprints from people. So like you see Jet Li's hands, which are like really small.
Oh.
Smaller than I saw a woman put her hand in the Jet Li one, and her hand was bigger than Jet Li's, and she turned to her friend, and they just started giggling. Sorry, Jet. Next time he sees me, I'll probably,
you're in trouble here.
Yeah, but then Jackie Chan's hands were huge, so way to go, Jackie. So that was really neat, and I always liked when I had some downtime just to go and sit there watch the water and just watch some people go by. It was just nice to see the tugboats coming in, and just a nice calm way to relax when you're doing a business trip. And of course, the advice I'm sure if you're going to Hong Kong, remember the food, Chinese food in anywhere in China is not Chinese food in America.
Right. Very well. It depends on what you're used to too. In terms of what you think of as Chinese food. I don't know what your experience is, but
I've eaten things. I've had snake, duck
does it
heart.
in fact taste like chicken?
Actually, the snake was one of the better things I actually had on one trip. The first time I went, it was for like 8 days, and I went with the guy that was from China, and we only ate at traditional Chinese restaurants.
Ah, okay.
I went an entire week eating nothing but traditional Chinese fare. And that cheeseburger and fries tasted really good when I got back to the U.S.
Well, the reason why I ask about the snake is I've got a friend who doesn't eat chicken. She doesn't know anything tastes like.
Oh, well, that would be tough. Yeah. So just tell her everything tastes like snake.
That's right.
But yeah, that wasn't bad. Eel, duck heart. Is interesting. I think duck tongue is one of the most revolting things you'll ever see, because they usually have the duck tongue and it still has the ligaments and it comes out and looks almost like a scorpion. And when someone brings it to you the first time, do you know what that is? And I'm looking at it. I don't know, but it looks painful. The other thing too is if you eat in China and you're in a group, they eat a little bit different than we would here, where you don't get your own plate. What happens is you have a big lazy Susan in front of you, and maybe you have 8 or 10 people at this table, and people are sharing the food. So what you have is on that lazy Susan, there's multiple dishes, and people are reaching in with the chopsticks that they just had in their mouth, pulling out what they want, putting it on their plate. So if you're someone that's squeamish about that kind of thing, you be warned. I always believed when you're in a country, you eat and do what they do and their
Sure.
customs. I didn't get sick, but now you can understand sometimes why certain viruses spread faster in that part of the world. Because for them to reach in with their chopsticks that were just in their mouth into a community plate, there's nothing to it.
Interesting. We went to more nouveau cuisine, so I don't think we saw nearly the traditional things. We heard about people trying to, renting a room and having a hard time spending enough money to pay for the minimum because their food was so inexpensive when you went to a place where the locals eat rather than a fancy place where the business people eat.
The food is really cheap. And that's, you can get a lot of it now. I mean, if you get into the back parts of China too, then it's really interesting. I mean, I was in the back. We went one of the trips went in the backwoods. I mean, it was the urinal. We stopped at a roadside. The urinal was basically a cement trough, and it was right across from an open slot, which was where you defecated, and there was worms and maggots crawling on the floor. It was one of those smells that you'll never forget, and it was bad. So yeah, there's some back parts of China that are just like, oh my God.
Well, for the two listeners who are still listening at this point, do you have any?
Now, by the way, I love China. And just you get to see different things. I mean,
right.
and that's the back parts of it. And I'm sure you go to parts of Arkansas that are no different.
And where were you at that point? You say you were in the back part. You're obviously not in the big cities on the business.
We were on the way to the Great Wall.
Oh, okay.
And which
so you're not that far from Beijing then at that point.
No, Great Wall's all over the place. I think we were near Tianjin at that point, and we had done a business meeting in Tianjin, and then the next day we went out to the Great Wall, and they really should name the thing the Great Staircase.
I've heard this. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about a leg workout. It's incredible. Now, where we were, which is absolutely beautiful, was like I said, it was in the middle of nowhere, and the walls going up these sharp cliffs, and you're climbing it and going for a long time, and it was hot, but it was well worth it. That I'm sad I don't have pictures of, because the person that took the pictures was supposed to send me those pictures, and I never got them. And that was the one place, because my camera had died. I ran out of pictures when I went there.
No. And getting back to food here a bit, because we've got to get to food here. And
okay,
favorite regional food?
I would say I liked more of the Shenzhen food. I think it's a little spicier.
Okay.
I found than the food that was in Beijing. So I've eaten at Shenzhen more often, so I kind of like that food a little bit. As far as favorites, you have to remember when you get chicken and fish, and that's the other thing, I like fish. So Shenzhen being close to the ocean,
sure.
The fish was much better. But when you get fish, you go and you pick the fish out, and you point to that fish, and then they come and bring you that guy that you just picked out. So it's a little different than ordering on the menu. You actually go and they go, okay, now Rob, pick fish. So you have to get used to picking the guy that, that's his last day. And then when you get like chicken, or you order the chicken, it comes with the whole head and neck still attached.
But you don't have to pick out the chicken though, at least.
No, I mean, what's common when you eat there is, you pull the chicken out, you pull a piece of it because it's diced, and then you spit the bones out onto the plate.
Okay.
On your plate.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, not the community plate, but yeah. So that's a little different. But I like that. Again, I did like snake, which I had, and I think that was in Nanjing, and that was really good. The snake I had. There was something I had at one meal, and when I asked what it was, they all laughed, and I didn't press anymore. Okay.
All right.
Don't want to know what it was.
Biggest surprise from all your trips to China? What kind of things really took you by surprise?
I think the biggest surprise was how big the cities were, how many people there were, how many cities there are that are so large. I mean, you go to a city like Nanjing and it's a small city, 8 million people. And it's so built up. Shenzhen, the amount of construction going on in Shenzhen was incredible. Uh, One of the times I was there, I was counting cranes, the big cranes you see in constructions. I counted over 20 something cranes before I stopped counting. There was that many new building skyscrapers going up. So I think that the amount of construction and the size of the cities just really was what threw me. And then just how friendly the people were to you as an American. I mean, they really, really treat you very well there.
Now, I get the impression you don't speak Chinese.
EDR, very little.
Okay.
Very, very little. Yeah, I mean, enough to, at the time when I was going all the time, enough to, get my way to my hotel. And
I'm going to guess that you speak a little Cantonese more than Mandarin, because in Mandarin it'd be EDN.
Well, then, yeah. Yes, but, enough to ask someone if they speak English, and say thank you, and just a couple phrases, and which at the time I was listening to those tapes and to learn it, and that was 2 years ago, and it's all faded since I haven't been back there in almost 2 years now.
Okay.
But
and not that hard to get by with just a little Chinese was your experience, even outside of the big cities?
Well, it was enough to get me pointed in the direction of someone that could speak English and help me out.
Okay.
In the big cities. Outside of the big cities, forget it. Yeah, then outside of the big cities, almost no one spoke English. Or at least the people that I came across didn't, because I was always with someone and they were always talking in Chinese, Cantonese to the person that they were dealing with.
Okay, so you didn't have to do as much traveler charades.
Yeah, I mean, I did a little, I would, when I would travel into China, there's many times I traveled on my own, where I would go into Hong Kong, then Shenzhen, visit with customers, and leave without no travel support, no one there with me speaking Chinese. So I was able to do that, get into the hotel, and get from the hotel in Hong Kong to the hotel in Shenzhen, then go and get out to visit the customers, then come back to the hotel, go out, find something to eat, and do it all on my own. So I had enough Chinese to get me to survive.
And the first time you went, what do you wish somebody had told you ahead of time?
About that everybody eats off the same plate.
Okay.
I mean, that one surprised me a little bit. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, that would have been one thing. The other one would have been, remember to always have money with you when you leave China, because there's a tax at the airport on your way out. So always make sure you have some money left over. Luckily, I was warned about that halfway through the trip, so I made sure I had money put aside. The other thing would be I was really surprised when I visited Shanghai how beautiful the women were. The women in Shanghai I just thought were absolutely gorgeous.
So your wife doesn't listen to podcasts, is what you're saying?
Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, no. Yeah. No, I told her too.
Okay.
So.
The thing that surprised me in Shanghai too is that I didn't see anybody who was overweight. Anybody who wasn't a tourist.
Now, when did you visit Shanghai?
I was there 2 years ago.
Okay, so you saw how built up it is and how nice and modern the subway and everything is.
Right.
Yeah. Now, Beijing is getting that way, but Beijing, the last time I was there, is very under construction and dirty compared to Shanghai. Shanghai is a much cleaner city.
As they get ready for the Olympics? Or
Olympics, yeah, everything's just ripped up. Yeah, all the roads are ripped up as they're getting the construction ready for the Olympics. So if you go to Beijing right now, before the Olympics, don't expect a pristine city.
Okay. It's a work in progress right now.
Yeah.
So I have to ask, you've hinted before we talked that your best travel story is actually not from China.
Oh yeah, my most embarrassing travel moment was from India, and I was in India visiting a customer, and we were doing a presentation where we were talking to them about our products, and they had us meeting off the main lobby in this meeting room, and it was basically a bunch of couches around some tables. So I was sitting down at the couch. Some and people would come in, we would talk to them, they'd leave, next group of people would come in. So I stood up to say hi to these women that had just come in to talk to. They sat down, I go to sit down, and whoosh, my pants split from back to front, wide open, as I sat down, my legs were apart, and wide open, these women's eyes just bulged right out of their heads. I quickly closed my legs and was thankful I was not free balling it that day, because that would have been really bad. Feel free to edit where you want there.
I don't even know what to do with that. That actually it has to do with my secret of stress-free interviewing for job interviewing. The job interview I had for the job I got out of college. I was interviewing, and the manager I was interviewing with happened to be a woman, and the fly on my suit broke before I went in that day, and I went through the whole full day's interviews, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. with the fly on my suit down. It's like, do you want to leave your briefcase here while you go to lunch? No.
Nope. I don't think that would be.
He seemed like a nice guy, but he clutched his briefcase a lot. But I got that job actually, and I found really since then no interview has been stressful. So that's Chris's tip for stress-free interviewing for the rest of your life.
I was just grateful that day when those pants split, that we had my luggage happened to be in the car, and I was able to do a quick change after that appointment before the next one. But I had an hour plus there with my pants split from back to front to where the zipper comes in the front, and that was rather embarrassing. And those women, I'm sure, are talking about it still to this day.
On that note. I'm not really sure we can really go anywhere from that, Rob. Thanks so much for being on the show and talking to us about your adventures or misadventures.
Well, Chris, it's been my pleasure. And, to say that, really, if you really want to go to China, I highly recommend it. It's beautiful. And if you go and see the terracotta soldiers, they pale in comparison. Any pictures you've ever seen pale in comparison to them in live. I mean, it's unbelievable when you see them live. Every National Geographic picture you've ever seen, throw it out. It's so much more impressive
because of the
in person.
Scope or
the size. You just don't the size, the scope. When you actually are there and you see them, and you're in this huge building, you see all these, and there's thousands and thousands of them. And it's just so impressive.
Well, we call it the terracotta soldiers, but really it's a terracotta army.
Yeah.
Full size and in number. Yeah, I want to see that.
It's just very, very impressive. And again, like I said, the pictures don't do it justice. You have to be there to see it and smell it and just really be surrounded by it. And that would be, I guess, the biggest surprise was how impressive that was.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Rob.
Chris, thank you so much for having me on the show, and I hope your listeners get out to China soon.
Thanks very much to Rob. I certainly enjoyed that. We'll have the opportunity to return the favor when Rob interviews me next weekend at the Podcast and Portable Media Expo in Ontario, California, where I will be. I'll remind people of that again. I have 4 internet resources for you today. The first one is a site called flycheapo.com, and links to all of these will be in the show notes as well as in the iTunes enhanced version of the show. Flycheapo.com is an index that helps you find the low-cost airlines that you may not have never heard of, things like Air Berlin or Hapag Express or some of those very obscure airlines. Check that out. The other one is airfarewatchdog.com. It's yet another way to find cheap airfare. One of the things that I like about this one is they check the seat availability for all the fares they list. So you won't do one of those, oh yeah, here's a cheap fare, but you can't get it. They also list fares from Southwest and JetBlue, and they also list one-way fares. So that might be worth your time. The third one is there's an episode number 10 of the Searching the Internet podcast, and that has information about different sites on the web for maps and driving directions. So you might want to check that one out. Also, links to that in the show notes, or Giggity for you listeners of School of Podcasting. And Geek Cruises. Geek Cruises, I am a geek, as some of you may know by this point, and I check out periodically what kind of cruises there are, Mac cruises or Photoshop cruises, but I think I've actually found one that my wife and I might both be interested in. That's next November as in November 2007. Not a lot of information about it yet, but it's a Shakespeare at Sea itinerary with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And I've done an episode on Ashland, Oregon and the Oregon Shakespeare Festival that included some sound scene tours. So you might want to start thinking about that. We're starting thinking about possibly doing a cruise to Panama with Shakespeare next November of 2007. In the community section of the show, I encourage you to comment on the show at amateurtraveler.com or leave a comment or on the discussion boards at amateurtraveler.com/board. I also had some information from Lorraine Romero, who has commented at times to time about a Alaska cruise that she is setting up. So in the show notes, you'll see a link to Lorraine's Alaska cruise if you're interested in information about that. And then I received 2 emails this week that I wanted to mention. The first one comes from Emily. Emily says she's an avid listener of the program, and her in-laws are coming in mid-October to San Francisco. She's trying to figure out what to do with them. Her mother-in-law can't walk for more than a block or two because of a bad knee, and she was trying to figure out whether Yosemite was accessible, and I wrote her some information about that. But if you have other information for Amy, you might either drop me an email and I'll send it along to her, or post something on the discussion boards about good ideas for traveling in the San Francisco Bay Area or close by for someone who can't do a lot of walking. I also had some information after we talked about Russia a while back about someone who is teaching Russian and knows a couple that have started a wonderful organization to help people to arrange to come to Russia and have English conversations for intensive language learning camp. If you're interested in information about that, drop me an email and I'll forward on your information to Kempton, who wrote me that email. Remember, as always, the email for this show is host@amateurtraveler.com. Please feel free to vote for the show at Podcast Alley, especially as they're featuring us this week, at Blueberry.com, the Blueberry Network, at Yahoo Podcasts, at Podcast Pickle, and all those other podcast sites that I forget. And check out the new pages for this show at podshow.com. This show now being a proud member of the podshow.com network. And as always, thanks so much for listening. This episode was brought to you by HotelBook.com, which features nearly 5,000 unique and independent hotels in more than 140 countries. Whether it's a resort, a cabana, or a castle, HotelBook.com invites you to stay your way and stay independent. Visit HotelBook.com and see the latest details for China. From an upscale city hotel to a relaxing beach retreat, HotelBook.com will show you the best deals for that one-of-a-kind travel experience. HotelBook.com. Stay independent.
The best and the brightest served up daily by the sharpest minds in content delivery, Podshow and Limelight.